heard that when you came in, your hiring manager resigned on the first day. You told your husband, I think I might have got a promotion to be COO.
Yeah, that's true. This was the world's fastest promotion. The former CEO was the one who hired me. I was supposed to report to him. Literally the day before I joined, he resigned. And that first meeting was a bit chaotic. But I'm a foreigner here. My EP had already switched over, I had already committed. And so I didn't know what I was getting myself into, to be honest.
How long was the acquisition process? How does an acquisition happen? Does it happen through a LinkedIn cold message? Is it an email?
For us, the acquisition process all in was about a year. But at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, I think we decided that we would run a formal acquisition process because throughout the previous 1 to 2 years, we started getting all these random inbounds, friends of friends, saying hey, would TIA be interested in selling? And then, so one of our shareholders basically was like, listen, you guys keep getting these little pings, but if you don't run a proper process, it's hard to corral everybody.
You report about the most successful founders, but also many that have closed down, right? What traits makes a good founder?
I think definitely insanely curious is super critical. It's you got to get the product right. You got to understand the market. You got to talk to the customers. You got to build your team. You know what I'm saying? There are so many things that there's just literally no way you can know, even if you're a second or third time founder, that you know everything, right? There's so many unknowns. And so you have to stay really curious about everything. And I think that feeds into the growth mindset. If you think you know best, that's probably a recipe for disaster.
What is one thing you've learned about work and life?
Actually, the main thing is it's an ego check. Kids keep you really, really humble. You know what I'm saying? It's I don't care how awesome you think you are at work, on stage, whatever. Yeah, exactly.
I'm hungry. I need you now.
You come home and then it's wipe my butt. And you're like, okay. And it just keeps you humble. And I think that's, like I said, it's one of the key traits that I think are important to being a great founder and entrepreneur. So.
Today we have a really special guest. Not many would swap a role at Apple in the heart of Silicon Valley for a role in a young tech startup in Singapore. Today, I want to talk about all things tech and business and startups, and there's no better person to talk about it than someone who's been at the heart of it over the last 6 years. It is my absolute privilege to welcome the COO of Tech in Asia, Maria Lee, onto the You Make It Look Easy podcast. Welcome to the show, Maria.
Hello, thanks for having me.
As I was giving the intro, I could sense that you were laughing already. I've got to start from the start. You left Apple at Silicon Valley, the heart of the HQ, for a young company, or in your words, a blob in Singapore. I'm curious to find out what was your internal motivations, but secondly, what was a stat or trend that convinced you that this must be the right move for you?
Okay, I have to correct the storyline just a little bit. Okay. Actually, Apple moved me over to Singapore first. So I didn't leave Apple and SF at the same time to join Tech in Asia. So what happened is I was working on Apple supply chain, and one of my main jobs was to help diversify Apple supply chain outside of China. So I was actually spending a lot of time in the region already in Southeast Asia. I was bringing up new Foxconn factories in Vietnam. We were looking for alternative suppliers in Indonesia, Malaysia, what have you. And so I was actually spending a lot of time in this region. At the same time, Silicon Valley. So I was on a plane basically once a week, every month or something like that. And it was kind of exhausting. And then I had also just gotten married. We had no kids. We were like, you know what? We've always wanted to live abroad. This is a good time. Let's just try. So my husband was at Tesla at the time and I was at Apple. So we actually just both raised our hands for internal transfers and ended up in Singapore. And I think both companies were very generous and obviously supporting the move and getting the passes and all that. But then once I came out here, so you asked about the data and trend. I'll talk about that in a second. But actually, once I came out here, what really struck me was how much, the digital economy was changing and how much value startups were starting to add within this region, right? And so even as just a consumer, if you weren't in tech, it's obviously in Singapore, you started to shop for groceries on Redmart. This is back in 2017 when I first moved. Grab, back then it was also Grab plus Gojek plus Uber, there was a lot happening. But then that's how you started to travel around town and things like that. And so you could see that the digital trend was already here, but it was also just going to get bigger as it kind of permeated more. And as a user, I definitely felt that. And then on the professional side, I don't know. I just like, I had been in big tech for a while. I had always done corporates, and I was just, I believed in the startup story. Again, coming from Silicon Valley, you could see the difference. I had plenty of friends in startups in SF, and then I was like, yeah, I really just believe in the difference that startups will be able to make across Southeast Asia, and across emerging markets in general. And I don't know, I just had this like hypothesis that like that was something that was like the next wave. That was something exciting. That's something that I wanted to be a part of. So to go back to the question about data and trends, I mean, I think, there are a few things to talk about. The most common talking points that people love to mention, the highlights are like, again, this was back then, it was like Southeast Asia digital economy is going to be like $250 billion in GMV or whatever. That's the economy SEA report that Temasek Bain and Google release every year. So like they always do a good job of framing like the big macro opportunity, of course. Then there is, people love to talk about like Southeast Asia's like overall population of 600 million. Indonesia's half of that. It's a very young, very mobile savvy population, and like rapidly urbanizing, right? So these are kind of like the talking points that if you've been in this space for a while, you'll just kind of hear over and over again. I think it does an amazing job of painting the macro opportunity. Of course, we can talk about like what the actual like what reality has looked like over the last few years as well, but for me, it wasn't a data-driven decision. It was totally emotional. And so what happened is, I knew I wanted to explore the startup scene in Southeast Asia. I was starting to look at various like startup roles and things like that. I'm starting to interview while I was still at Apple. And my friend honestly just snuck me into a Tech in Asia conference. The 2018 Tech in Asia conference was here in Suntech. And, I didn't really know, and I was too cheap to pay for a ticket. So he came out of the conference.
Pass you the pass.
Yeah, like took off his wristband, put it on me, and then I went in, right? And I was like, because he was like done for the day or whatever. And I was like, oh my God. But that was like, it was such an emotional thing, right? I was on the middle of this giant exhibition floor at Suntech. The energy was like incredible. And then you at the startup, our famous startup factory where, it's just like booth after booth after booth of early stage startup. It's like the buzz there, people were talking, everybody like, it was just so high energy. And then I went into the main stage session. I think like I caught like Claire Hughes, who was the CEO of Stripe at the time. She was on stage, and it was like amazing to also see this like power female executive from the Valley. And then randomly I turned around and I just happened to be standing next to Eduardo Saverin, who was an investor in Tech in Asia as well. And then you could tell, I actually didn't even know who he was. I could tell he was famous because people were like taking pictures and selfies with him. And then I was like, hey, who is that guy? And then I Googled him. I was like, oh, right, that guy. Anyways, my point is like that first CIA conference was just so high energy, so full of optimism. And it made me realize like, what I had seen from my desk research, from the reports and whatever, I was like, wow, this sounds like a great opportunity. But what I felt was even more powerful. And after that, I was like, I'm definitely doing this. And I think my recruitment, whatever, went on overdrive. And I started reading Tech in Asia. And then one day I just saw a job posting from Tech in Asia being like, oh, we're looking for a strategy director or something like that. And I had done management consulting before. And I was like, I can do strategy. I do commercial strategy at Apple. Like, this is fine. And went in and interviewed and yeah.
And the roller coaster journey doesn't stop there. Instead, it only starts once you get into Singapore. I heard that you said you applied for a strategy director role.
Yeah.
I heard that when you came in, your hiring manager resigned on the first day. You told your husband, I think I might have got a promotion to be CEO. Like, what went through your mind on day one?
Right. Yeah, that's true. This was the promotion, the world's fastest promotion. And it was something, so exactly. So the former CEO was the one who hired me. I was supposed to report to him. To be honest, the company wasn't in great shape back then. And I suspect that subconsciously he was maybe looking for an out. And so like literally the day before I joined, he resigned. And that first meeting was a bit chaotic, to be honest. And in the whole interview process, I had actually only met Willis once, right? Because I wasn't really supposed to report to him. And so it was more of like a sanity check, like, okay, we don't hate each other. Like, this is going to be fine kind of thing. But like, I'm a foreigner here. My EP had already switched over, like I had already committed. I was just kind of like
backing out.
Totally. It's like in for a penny, in for a pound, like what whatever. And so I didn't know what I was getting myself into, to be honest, but it's been the best learning journey. Yeah, and yeah, looking back, even if I'd known what I was getting myself into, I would still absolutely would have taken the opportunity. I think these things don't pop up so often, but this is also why people join startups, right? Because crazy things happen and you react on the fly, and it's a bit of a meritocracy in that, like, if you can function and if you can work in that sort of environment, like the sky's the limit, right? There's no like, oh, you have to wait for your 2-year track here and then the rotation and whatever. And I think that is the beauty of startups, and it totally played out in my favor, I think.
Yeah. And I think you must have enjoyed this roller coaster journey. It's been 6, coming on 7. What is the scale of Tech in Asia's business right now?
Yeah. Okay. We definitively like to say that, in our space for digital media and events, whatever, covering Asia's tech and startup scene, we think we're the largest in terms of readership. I suspect based off of revenue as well, but obviously the data is not quite as easy to see. But yeah, we're really proud of what we built, right? So we have something like over 12 million monthly views across all of our platforms. So like our website, our mobile app, our social channels, our daily newsletter reaches almost 200,000 people. At our events last year, like in 2024, I think we hosted something like over 10,000 attendees across 5 countries. On the team side, we have just over 100 people, similarly, I think across 5 or 6 countries. And so, like on the one side, I think we are doing, it's a very fragmented region, right? So we're doing our best to kind of cover it from both a content perspective as well as an events perspective. But at the same time, we're mostly English based. We obviously have we have a Bahasa site in Indonesia specifically. But we really believe that we're adding the point of us is, our mission always to build and serve Asia's tech and startup community. And the way that we can add value specifically is to help like a lot of these leaders at the different startups to have the knowledge and information they need as they're kind of making decisions as to like what else is happening within the region, the biggest, like headlines across the board, the biggest trends, and being able to float that up and provide the information, the insights that they might need to make decisions for their own business.
Yeah, no, you mentioned it's a fragmented market. I can totally understand that because I was from Grab. It wasn't one Southeast Asia business. It was 9 country specific business.
Yeah.
So I totally understand about, language, culture.
Yeah.
In all that you shared about Tech in Asia, like what are how is it categorized? I know there is a subscription business, there's the events business, like if you had to categorize them in like revenue drivers, like how would they be categorized?
Yeah. So our business model has been pretty stable for the last few years. So we view it as like 3 legs of a tripod. So subscription revenue is certainly one of the legs. The next one is our events business. And then the third one is our like what we call studios, which is our commercial business. And so when we do branded content there, we do branded events with like our partners there. And so on our events side specifically, it also further breaks down into either sponsorships or ticketing revenue. And then, and so those are the 3. And we feel like it's quite complementary. And we always, we talk about virtuous cycles because we're at a startup, but it's, the stronger your media business is, then also it drives traffic as well as insights for your events business, which obviously helps sells tickets and then helps sell sponsorships. And then also brings in like our commercial advertising arm. So I think one thing we're pretty careful about is, how we advertise as well to not like interfere with the actual user and reader experience. And so we're very clear that this is branded content. We do a little bit of like banner ads on the website, but that's honestly like tiny fraction of everything. And so really, it's really about, we feel like we know our audience really well, and we're trying to help our partners tell their story to our audience and being able to kind of build a business around that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you definitely got what you wanted, because when you came in here in the last 6 years, I think this continued roller coaster is an understatement. When you came in, you mentioned that the health of the company wasn't really doing good. You also went through an acquisition with SPH. I know that it was stated it's a 12 to 18 month process. So I can't think of like any downtime during the whole last 6 years. Like, how have you been?
There's been no downtime. So prior to TIA, the longest I had ever stayed at a job was Apple, which was 4 years. And the joke that I always had with my husband was like, basically, the first 2 years is really fun and like you're just learning as much as you can in whatever company you are. And then by the 3rd year, for me at least, I would always start to get like a little
The honeymoon phase is
bored.
over.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, I know what I know, but then and then that's usually when you would see me switch role, move to Singapore. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm looking for ways to stay within the company, but like new ways to kind of approach the job. And then the fourth year is usually like, okay, it's time to look elsewhere. I've never had that downtime with DIA. It's been like one thing after another. And so, yeah, 2019, obviously my first year. Financially, we were a little bit distressed that year. And so that was a really intense year of rebuilding. Like the business model I just described to you, I think we were reworking all of that all at one go in 2019. So 2019 was super intense. 2020 was obviously COVID. 2021, still COVID, but I also had my first kid.
Oh.
And so like on the personal life, then things also kind of went crazy. 2022 was good. We came back into in-person events. It felt like some sort of normalization, like found some balance. But then, 2023, we kicked off the acquisition process. And then 2024 was the first year of integration. So it's like literally, I can tell you year by year, like exactly like what the flavor of the year was and like what the big challenge, like the chapters are just so clear, not by design. It's just how it's played out. So it's been
the acquisition piece is interesting, especially because that's after SPH divested its media business. Like, how long was the acquisition process? Like, do you recount what's the process? Like, how does an acquisition happen? Does it happen through a LinkedIn cold message? Like, is it an email? Did it take 12 months of duty? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah. Okay. So for us, the acquisition process all in was about a year. Specifically with SBH, I think it was maybe 7 to 8 months. So the way it happened is at the beginning of 2023, Wilson and I had a bunch of like conversations. I mean, we always talk about kind of the future of the company, what's best for the company. But at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, I think we decided that we would run a formal acquisition process because throughout the previous like 1 to 2 years, we started getting all these like random inbounds, like just like pings through friends of friends, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, would TIA be interested in selling? And then we're always kind of, we weren't in a desperate need to sell, but like it just felt like it was like frequent enough and from like multiple areas, like there were some inquiries from across APAC, some from India, some from the Middle East, from the US, whatever. And so we were like, okay. And so one of our shareholders basically was like, listen, you guys keep getting these little pings, but if you don't run a proper process, it's hard to corral everybody. It's just like this, like, I think they'll tell you the same thing about fundraising, right? You want to run a really tight process. And so, and so you create that FOMO and you create that incentive to move forward in the timeline. Otherwise, if you're having a random casual chat here, the random casual chat here, they never kind of like coalesce into like a thing.
Time drain.
Exactly. And it's a time suck as well. And so we were like, okay, we felt like we had enough of these like random feelers coming in that we decided to run a formal acquisition process that kicked off, January 20.
So it wasn't internally motivated or triggered. It was just because there's so much signals from the market.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So once the term sheet started coming in, then we were like, okay, this is getting serious. Like, and then we had a proper conversation like, do we want to do this? Is this the best thing for the company? But actually, when we started running the process, it was mostly just like corral everybody into one thing, and onto one timeline and see what the actual interest level was. And we were fully committed to be like, if it doesn't come through or we don't like the term sheets or we don't even like the buyers and we don't feel like it's going to vibe, then we just go back to operations. Like it's fine. Like we were fine. So that's kind of what kicked off the process. So we appointed advisors, like we did the whole thing. We like prepped the internal data room. We did a little bit of a virtual roadshow. And so anyway, so I think SPH, it's funny, we have a history with SPH. Actually, before I even joined the company, I think they had put in a term sheet on our Series C,
really?
Maybe, that Willis had rejected at the time.
Okay.
And we picked Hanwha. I think this is public knowledge.
Yes, I saw that.
Okay, good. And I think back then, because SPH was, like the joke was Singapore property holdings as opposed to the media side. And so he just didn't feel like it was like the right fit at the time. But we knew the team. Obviously, they had been keeping an eye on us. We had been keeping an eye on them. And so it wasn't, like when the outreach happened during the acquisition process, it was just kind of like all these like loose threads started coming together. And it was like, oh, this actually really kind of makes sense.
And I think people normally talk about or celebrate the moment that it gets acquired, but nobody talks about how much behind the scenes work happens. So a lot of times, a lot of our community members and listeners are all like founders, business owners.
Yeah.
What happens from the moment you receive a term sheet? Like, do you do an internal, you know, DCF analysis? Do you then take this to individual investors? And then every investor has a different timeline, a different mandate. Like, how do you get everybody to say yes to this and then still be able to meet that deadline so that this term sheet doesn't expire? Like,
Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah. So, okay, this is where I would definitely, and I think an acquisition process is different than a fundraising process, but obviously if you're raising like relatively later stage, like this is just not something I would recommend anybody to do it on their own and without professional help, right? So our financial advisors were so good at running a structured timeline. It was literally like, it was like term sheets needs to be in by this date. Out of that original, like those initial term sheet offers, then we would pick like whatever, 2 finalists, 3 finalists, whatever, to move on to the next round. And then we would run like 2 levels of DD, like it was all super structured. And so it is really important, I think, as the company on the founder side, that you run a really tight process to basically weed out people who are not that serious. And this process did weed out a few people, like some of the people who had been talking to us on and off for 2 years.
And they want to fish information.
Yeah,
It's
they're
free.
fishing.
Yeah.
Well, or they like don't actually, they didn't really like think about the capital, they don't actually, they have the money, but it's like, they haven't really put it together. Like they don't, like, or the board rejection, like, it kind of exposes some of these things. And so then you're only actually talking to the people who are really serious. And so that's why running a really tight process is very important. And then also having financial advisors to also kind of be that buffer. Because I think on our side, we were always usually talking to like the editorials team, like there was some sort of internal champion for the deal, right? There's some business rationale as to why they would want to acquire us. And that was great. But there's obviously a lot of people on the actual deal side, like it's usually the CFO, the M&A team, whatever, who are kind of working through like the nitty gritty of like the, like the data room and the DD and stuff like that. And you want to be able to maintain both tracks. You want to keep the conversation with the editorial team or the internal champion like friendly, loose, right? Like you're talking about like the vision, possibility, while you're also getting down to brass tacks on like some of the other stuff about the deal, which is like, okay, definitely valuation, but then also like,
Is it a celebratory moment or a sad moment when an acquisition like this happens? And the reason is because TIA started as like a YC company, right? So a lot of YC companies all want to be that, billion-dollar unicorn.
Yeah.
Like, how was that moment like? Like, moment of relief?
Oh, when we actually got acquired?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, we announced the deal in November and the deal closed officially on January 2nd. And so we spent November and December. Okay, one thing I'll say about the acquisition process, I just did not realize how many steps there were. It sounds so dumb, but when we got term sheet, I was like, great, the finish line is always almost in sight. And then like 3 months later, I'm like, oh my God, we're like nowhere near, And then so it's like term sheet and then multiple rounds of due diligence. And then you have to sign the SPA, which is like the actual like contract that says they're going to commit to buying you. But from the SPA, then there's a lot of CPs, conditions precedent, I think, which is like what you have to fulfill in order for the deal to close. And so like, it just felt like there was like a, I thought we had just cleared the top of the mountain, and then there was like there's like another top of the mountain. You're like, oh my God, okay, just keep going. And so honestly, by the time the deal closed, it was more of like a thank God, because on the company side, up until the deal closes, there's still a chance the deal could fall through. And of course, like it would be super irresponsible to put all your eggs into like one basket and only focus on the deal, because like operationally we still had to keep going. We were still running events. We were still doing all these things. And so, it was just like, we were just actually like, for me at least, relieved that we had made it to that point, because you're kind of living in this fear of like, the risk is going down, right? It's like from term sheets, like, okay, 50% chance it doesn't happen. During the SPA negotiations, you're like 25% chance it doesn't. Like the risk is going down, but there's still that 1% chance that the deal might not go through, and you would have wasted all this time 100%. And energy. And so, I mean, it's a very stressful process because you do need to keep an eye on operations.
In the startup world, there's this analogy, a bit of a crude analogy, like people congratulate you for the pregnancy, but they don't show you how many times they got screwed behind the doors. So it's like, okay, it sounds like it's the first time you heard it, but this is like, same thing for acquisition or like fundraise. Everybody like, oh, congratulations, you raised this amount, but like the real work only starts now.
Okay, as a mom to two young kids, let me slightly change that. Everyone loves to see like the social media posts announcing the delivery or like the 1 month milestone, but you don't see all the sleepless nights. You don't see all the like the pukes and the sick and the whatever behind the scenes. So I feel like it is a little bit more like that.
Yeah.
Screwing behind the doors. I mean, no comment. Not my preferred one. But yeah, it is kind of like that. And to be honest, we're media. Like we do the same thing, right? We're like, send us your PR about when you fundraise. But we also, I mean, this is why we have a multi whatever content approach, touch approach, but it's like we also want to be highlighting the hard stories and so people really know what they're getting into, which is why I think Willis and I have been quite vocal about our experience as well, because there aren't that many M&As that happen in this area, and we think that people should just be well prepared. I mean,
more
happening.
So it's the entity that recently had a restructure. They bought you guys over. What was the vision that SPH pitched that convinced you guys that this is the right mothership to be adopted into, right? I looked at one of the most public stat in 2020. The Business Times is probably one of the best equivalent. I think when it first launched, they had around 2,000 subs. When they talk about their social media reports, they maybe get around 15K, 16K followers. So this was probably a clear-on acquisition to just accelerate their presence in the business and tech space. Like, what was the vision that convinced you guys? Because I'm pretty sure for a C-suite level, this never is just a financial decision, right? No. It's emotional, it's vision related. Like, what was the dream that they pitched you guys?
Yeah. I think the vision for me is very clear. We have always wanted to build the leading tech media brand title in Asia. And the Business Times wants to build the leading business title in Asia. And so it made sense that to combine, we could actually have a shot at building the leading business and tech title in Asia. That's it. And so I think there's a lot of other things. Like if you get into the more nitty gritty, I think there are probably 3 areas that we do, I think, particularly well that SPH was hoping to learn from. One is, of course, like on the digitalization side, we're obviously all digital. SPH has done a very good job of moving a lot of their stuff digital, but like they're still caught between this like print legacy as well as like a very like going full onto digital media. And so I think we build products as a digital startup does, like I think there's some of that muscle that they were interested to learn about. I think we don't shy away from regional stuff. Yep. Like I mentioned, we're in like 6 countries. We run events everywhere. We just pick up and go, right? And I think that is something that they want to learn from. And then actually our events business as well. It's a big revenue driver for us. It's a big brand builder for us. It's how a lot of people get their first touch point into us. And I think SPH also, we're curious. So it was, the combined vision is to build that title, that really like the go-to title for business and tech in Asia. But I think probably the actual rationale always fell out around like the digitalization, the regionalization, and the events business.
Yeah, I could see how, and it's only because of doing the research for this, right? I was digging into SPH annual report. This was back in the latest, like 2020, 2021, before.
Okay. I feel like you've gone deeper on this than I have, but teach me.
I'm interested about this, right? They mentioned that was the second consecutive year where digital distribution overtook physical distribution.
Right.
So I was like,
right.
And that was 2021. So I could see why in 2023, like it all makes sense for them to acquire a full digital first, media company.
Yep.
So I know that post-acquisition, it was mentioned, it's a 12 to 18 months process. Like we know with every startup, another marriage analogy, this is like a marriage, right? Really putting 2 homes together. Like what stage or what status is this marriage going on right now?
Yeah. So the 12 to 18 month, I think that was announced as the integration because what we didn't want to do, and actually this is 100% to SPH's credit, what they didn't want to do is come in too strong. Like on day one, be like, these are our HR policies, follow them. This is how we work. You know what I'm saying? Like they didn't want to destroy the value that they were acquiring. And so we put out the 12 to 18 month integration timeline to be like, for TIA at least, not too much will change at first. We'll continue to do what we do, and then over time, we'll figure out ways to marry our operations and make it a little bit more seamless. Where we are in the process, actually, we're still quite independent. They really don't interfere with day-to-day operations, which is amazing. This is something they had promised during the acquisition process, but you never really know, right? But I can a year and like 15 months after the close, I can definitely say like they've been amazing in terms of letting us, continue to run TIA the way that we see fit. And so not much has changed. Like our titles didn't change, our HR policies didn't change. Like we really kind of still run. The few touch points have been we're starting to cross collaborate on a few different digital projects, which was part of the goal. We co-hosted our annual flagship Jakarta event last October. So we're starting to see like some of these small touch points, but it's been more of like that's more of like a partnership, joint collaborative effort level, as opposed to like our core operations have remained relatively untouched. And I think it's been great for us. I will say in Singapore here, we actually moved into the SPH office.
Oh, okay.
Just the January this year, so 2 months ago.
Okay.
That's actually probably been the biggest shift physically,
Yes.
right? Because now we show up to like
Yeah.
the SPH corporate office. But
Everything operates separately. Like when I went to the Google office, YouTube has its own office. Like all their meeting rooms are segregated. Is that how it's structured as well?
I mean, kind of. So we have one part of a larger office. So in our overall office space, I mean, it's like 3 giant buildings, right? But in our office space, BT has one section. The editor-in-chief team has the one section, and we have one section. And we just kind of cross collaborate. But like we're still on a hybrid work schedule, and so most of our team comes in like 2 or 3 days a week, and then it feels like the BT team comes in on like the other days of the week, and so actually
Coordinated.
I mean, it's super not. It just happens but like it really feels like when we're in office, it's really just TIA in office. And if I come in on a random off day because for a meeting or whatever, and then the BT side is totally full, so I feel like our team thinks they don't work and their team thinks that we don't work. But it's just like the way that the office schedule works.
On the conversation about acquisition, if we take a step back, I noticed there's a trend in acquisitions for media companies. Most recent, of course, like TechCrunch, just like earlier this month.
Yeah.
Over the last 3 to 4 years, I think, South by Southwest, Vox Media all started getting acquired. Like what's happening in the media publication space?
Oof, gosh. Okay, this is, I don't know, obviously. I think if I knew, I would be doing something different. But so here's my take on like the history of media startups, like privately held media companies and their valuation and how the world views them. So I think that in the mid-aughts, so like in the 2015 era or whatever, this is when people were like, okay, subscription model plus media, like that you could run a media startup like a SaaS business. And then so that's when that you saw like Vice and HuffPo and BuzzFeed pick up massive funding rounds and massive valuations because everybody was like, okay, we're going to monetize those eyeballs. And then obviously then the algorithm changed, right? The Facebook and changed their algorithm. And then so like then eyeballs weren't so interesting. Then you had to go to like a slightly different. So anyways, I think there's 2 things happening. One is the business model for media startups or for digital media companies is actually not that clear. I think most of them are aligning to something similar to what we have, which is like you need some sort of like recurring SaaS type subscription type model, plus events, plus advertising, and cannot just be one or the other. But this has been an evolution, right? Like for a while it was just like all clickbait, and then it was like all subscription, and then it was like all advertising, and so it's been an evolution in terms of how media companies actually make money. And this is actually true for digital and print, to be honest. So that's one. But then the other difference on top of that is how VCs and institutional capital view the business of media. And for a while, they thought they could run it like a SaaS company. And so that's when you were getting SaaS valuations. And then everyone's like, okay, actually, that's not the case. I mean, BuzzFeed did an amazing job, right? Like they ponied up all the way to an IPO and then some. Like that's an incredible feat. But at the same time, it's like the PE ratios, like those numbers don't actually look like a tech company. Like it looks like a much more traditional, more conservative. And so those evaluations were all overblown. So then in terms of like why the most recent wave of acquisitions, if you will, I mean, a few things. One is like actually at the end of the day, these media brands are amazing brands, right? And they're amazing for distribution. They're amazing for content, like audience eyeballs and attention and engagement. And so like there is definitively value there, but people just didn't know how to value it before. And so all things considered, relatively, like speaking now, they're relatively cheap. And so I think, you see companies starting to acquire. So a good example would be, I mean, of course, New York Times has bought over both Wirecutter and The Athletic. Same thing, like these are great consumer plays and a way for them to to pick up like new and relatively niche audiences. But then HubSpot bought over, oh man, I'm blanking on it. HubSpot bought over a newsletter company because it was a distribution play. And so for them, it's a great way to just build a captive audience.
Okay.
So you have like the newsletter aspect of it, which reaches like hundreds of thousands of people. But then HubSpot can also start to feed their and like seed their own products into that.
It's a bit like the LinkedIn and Microsoft type of deal,
a little bit.
Those are potential buyers for the main product. Right?
Yeah, right. So I think when it comes to media acquisitions, it's like you can either exit to a strategic partner the way we did, right? Which is like you exit to another media company who's just trying to build up their capabilities and their products and services. It could be a distribution play, which is what I think the HubSpot. So like is a bit of a trend of like SaaS companies really buying some of these media outlets or these digital media startups because, you know, it's a great way to kind of build their audience really quickly, or a consumer play as well, which is kind of like the same SaaS thing. Yeah.
Do you think there's a change in consumer preference for media consumption? And my own anecdotal observation is people want to hear and follow the personality, less of like the brand. Like I think the most common example is like people follow Elon, they don't follow like Tesla.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And right now you see a trend of CEOs right now taking selfie videos of themselves rather than using the normal like annual report. I think the best example I was talking to my friend is so I used to be from Grab, so I'm a bit biased, but I think the CFO, after he did his annual review, he just took a video of himself walking down the escalator and just, I had a great annual review, blah blah. Like, do you think there's a change in consumer preference?
Definitely. I think there's like a lot more authenticity coming through. And what I've generally heard is that like, okay, very controversial figure, obviously Elon Musk. But I think with the types of Elon Musk, like even worse, Donald Trump. But with these kind of figures where they have that direct channel on Twitter/X, where they're talking directly to the people, it has actually made other executives feel less, like it has given them more courage to be themselves instead of like hidden behind a wall of like PR people and like and agencies and, you know, like media training and things like that. And so I think that authenticity is actually great. I think it's a good thing because I don't know, like, again, I'm in the media business. I talk to a lot of PR people and I just feel like that authenticity is what people are looking to connect with. And that's not just on the media side, right? Like even on the consumer side, like the Kardashians are doing it because they're them, not because, you know, Skims as a brand or like whatever. I don't even know all their brands, but like whatever their brands are, it's not about the brand. It's about the person behind the brand. And I do think that that's just how our overall culture is trending at this point.
That is a great segue because you've been at the intersection of reporting great business news, bad business news, you know, startup fundraiser, acquisition and all that. I've got to tap into your brain for listeners who want to find out like what it takes to build a successful company, a successful business. Are there people who are not suited to start their own company?
Are there people who are not? No, I don't think so. I think everybody can do it.
Okay.
I think everyone can do it. I mean, I think it will come more easily and more naturally to some people, but I do think everyone can do it because I think at the end of the day, to be a founder is to really have that beginner mindset and that growth mindset on everything, right? And so it's this weird mix of you have to be the most optimistic person possible, but then also like the most self-aware and self-critical person possible. Like you just have to be aware that you're always learning. And I think for those people, and also not get caught up too much in your own ego and then like do things for the right reasons and whatever. And so I think that level of like self-awareness and growth can be difficult for some people, but I think they're capable of doing it. Yeah. It's just really a matter of like how far are you willing to put yourself outside of your comfort zone?
Are there traits, because you report about the most successful founders, but also many that have closed down, right? Have you picked up like what traits makes a good founder, someone who's, you know, has the right personality to start and last through a business?
Yeah. Okay. So I think definitely insanely curious is super critical. The reason is like there's just so many things when you start a company it's like you got to get the product right. You got to understand the market. You got to talk to the customers. You got to build your team. You know what I'm saying? Like there are so many things that there's just like literally no way you can know, even if you're a second or third time founder, that you know everything, right? There's so many unknowns. And so you have to stay really curious about everything. And I think that feeds into the growth mindset. If you think you know best, that's probably like a recipe for disaster because, you know, that's where you just like, you start ignoring what the market's saying, what the data's saying, what people are saying. And yeah, so stay insanely curious. I think part of that is you have to like also have to stay humble, right? Like there's always something new to learn. And you get over your ski tips, you know, the moment you think you know better. And so staying really humble, obviously, and honestly, probably also staying optimistic as well. There's a lot of downs, you know, in the founder journey. And so if you get too bummed out by every setback or you like wallow too much in every failure and you cannot learn what you need to learn from it and then move on, like then you're just going to get stuck.
Yeah.
You're just going to start spinning your wheels.
One of the commonality I've heard of people starting a company, not many people wake up with this brilliant idea. It's normally because, you know, it's a personal problem or they just hate their desk job and they want to try something.
Yeah.
For people who are currently, you know, having a full-time job, but they always wanted to start a business, what is like Maria's, like, you know, 3-step, 5-step tip to starting that business? Do they like quit their job tomorrow? Do they find something that they're passionate about? Do they pick a trend? Like, how do they get from 9 to 5 into like, you know, starting the founder mode, that startup journey?
Yeah. I mean, all great companies, I think, start with the problem, right? Like you have to be solving a problem that you care about. I think that if there was maybe a small window of time where you could just pick something based off of trends analysis, but if you didn't passionately care about it, you maybe was still successful. I actually don't think, I think those opportunities are fewer and far in between right now. So it needs to be a problem that you personally care about because again, if you're going to build your entire company, you're going to run at least like 10 years of your life around this thing. It needs to be a problem that you care so much about, but that even when you have like the world's worst day, you're still in it for the fight, you know? And I think if it's just like a desk research kind of thing, then you're not gonna, like, you don't have the passion there. So number one, definitely pick a problem that you are really passionate about. Number two, talk to the users, right? Like if you don't, you might care about the problem and other people might care about the problem, but like you need to be able to, you might care about them in different ways. You might expect different solutions. So you need to always be talking to the users. If the customers don't want it, you're dead in the water. And then from the user side, then you start to develop the product, but you can never get too wedded to what that product is, right? This is not, so rarely is it a, if you build it, will they come kind of situation. And so it's really staying true to the core problem and then adapting your solution to find things that will help solve that problem in as many different ways as possible. Yeah. So, and then to keep radiating outward, then so then assuming that you found, you understand your customer super well, you understand their problem, you have started to build a solution, then you start building like the team around it, right? It's very important to recruit like the right people, to build the right kind of culture that will sustain it. And last is like the process. I think processes can be very brittle. And so you need to, for me at least, I think processes need to be in codifying the right things that you want about everything else that I mentioned, as opposed to the last thing.
So the process is like setting up SOPs.
Yeah, like this is how we do things. Because what will happen is over time, people will ultimately forget why we do something because the customer likes it, how we do it, this is our solution, who we do it for, like this is our team and our people, whatever. And they go straight to the process. And so you need to make sure that like for the 1,000th person that you onboard to your team, they understand the hierarchy of why you do what you do, as well as the second person on your team. And so you don't just teach them about process, but you teach them about the customer need, that you teach them about like the problem that the customer has that you're trying to solve, why you guys have this particular solution. One thing that I think people don't realize is that it's easy. You can have product market fit, lose product market fit, and find product market fit again, right? It's not like PMF isn't like a one and done thing. Like, okay, you got it, you'll never lose it again. It's actually a constant struggle to keep finding it.
Trends change, consumer
trends change, and yeah, you need to stay on top of that. And so, like, I mean, Airbnb, they had to find PMF multiple times. They had to find it, like, earlier, whatever, when they were first a startup, but then again, like what did it look like during COVID, like, and then every time you launch a new product, you have to find PMF again. And so my point is like, if you don't have that like really flexible mindset and built into across your organization, you just focus on the process, the moment it might be fine while you still have PMF, but you will probably eventually lose PMF and the team won't know how to like re-find it again. And that's probably why you see most corporates go down, because they've gotten so big, they've gotten so comfortable with having their PMF, which might be amazing, but once they lose it, that team isn't as well equipped as the initial founding team to go back and rediscover PMF.
I mean, sometimes they use something like an acquisition to like revitalize it or change the structure.
Yeah, of course. But, like acquisitions, integration's hard. Like we could talk about, but like acquisitions are hard as well. And so, yeah. And then you're also kind of outsourcing your innovation. Like, wouldn't it be better to just have it as your own internal engine? Like if you could keep it in-house, you should, that would just make for a more resilient organization overall.
Yeah. One question that, I was writing down and I was just personally curious to ask is, having been at, the 10,000 foot view of the ins and out of tech startups, if Tech in Asia was a VC today, where do you think you'll place most of your money in?
Oh my God. Actually, this is why Tech in Asia is not a VC. Because to be a VC, you have to believe in the really... Okay, so obviously I think... I'll speak for myself personally. I won't speak for Willis or Terrence, but like obviously I think this AI space is an easy one. What I would say specifically for AI in Southeast Asia is that actually what's great compared to 2 years ago is that LLMs are now being commoditized, right? And so like for me, it's really a dime a dozen kind of thing. And I mean, not a dime a dozen, they're all amazing, but like there are so many of them. You have like this amazing option of choice. And that's amazing because I don't think Southeast Asia could compete very well on that sort of like infrastructural level, right? And so like when it was like a race for LLMs, I was like, oh God, like what are we gonna do here? But now that LLMs are a bit more commoditized, and what I think you're gonna start to see is like these agents, things are moving much more into an agent mode. Things are moving into an actual application layer. Now I think Southeast Asia has like a really interesting opportunity because what happens is that like those agents are built for a specific, at this point, there's no AGI yet, but they're built for a specific task. And there's so many things happening here that are very specific to how Singapore does something, how Indonesia does something, how Vietnam does something, that you can't expect an American company or like a European or even a Chinese company to build that particular application layer or that particular agent because they don't have that workflow. So there's nothing for them to automate on that side. But it's great to see it like here because I think the developers here, they're like, oh, we do see this actual use case. It's a bit smaller, right? Like, I mean, I don't know about on a global scale, but I do think there's going to be a trend of these like tiny companies, like AI native companies, where it's just a few people, but they're using AI and they're solving a very specific use case that's within this region. And I think that's really interesting. And it's a totally different startup world than what we've seen previously, right? Which is just like, global SaaS companies or global, like the Ubers of the world, like these global ride hailing companies. But I think you'll see like a lot of these smaller shops around town. Also
just because of the language issue, right? In Southeast Asia, it's not just 9 countries. It's not just 9 languages. Like, let's say Indonesia alone has number of dialects. Like you said, you can
Same
see
in
all this
Philippines.
macro use cases. Okay, so you think that the application agent layer for this specific use cases in Southeast Asia will be where you put your money on?
That's something, I mean, I don't know, but that's something I would definitely keep an interest in because like that, I mean, until somebody develops AGI, who else is going to be building those applications? Like only somebody locally. And I think I also think about like where Southeast Asia has a competitive advantage. And so again, if it's not a problem for an American company, they're not going to solve it. That's great. So I think that's one. And then this is a personal thing. It's just climate tech. Obviously like Southeast Asia, between Malaysia and Indonesia, they have like a third of the world's like biosphere reserves. Like there's some amazing natural stuff happening here that I don't think we're doing as great of a job in terms of protecting. And I just, that's.
Are these the trends that mirrors what you're seeing from a Tech in Asia point of view in terms of where funding is going, in terms of where companies are starting up?
I mean, AI for sure, yes. But I think if you talk to the investors as of last year, they would have told you that they're not seeing as many AI companies come out of Southeast Asia. So like that's one thing where they're looking for the deals, but there's not enough in the pipeline. But again, I think that's because we were in this like really high intensity like LLM development model development type phase. I think now that hopefully things are moving into the more application agent layer, there actually will be more coming out of Southeast Asia. So I think that's what investors are looking for. Climate, honestly, no, not so much. That's just my own
It's
thing.
something that's evergreen, right?
It's something that is evergreen. The other thing that I get excited on the climate side specifically, but is that, actually one thing that's unique about Asia is Asia's probably the only region in the world that's still actively building. Like infrastructure in the US and Europe is like decaying and crumbling. They're not really rebuilding it. But Asia's like constantly building new skyscrapers, like new buildings, like these cities are growing. And so like, I think that's like a lot of opportunities to experiment with new materials, new supply chains, like whatever. Sorry. But back to your original question. So where is money still going? Honestly, still fintech, still insurance. Like there's still a lot of people, when you think about emerging markets, there's still a lot of people in like tier 4, tier 5 cities around the region that, are just starting to access a lot of the digital infrastructure that we're already used to. So that's still of interest in terms of population wise. Of course, the main challenge over the last few years is like, is there revenue to be made there? And then is there revenue eventually to be made there versus like now?
Okay. So AI agents, fintech, climate change, climate tech.
Yeah.
On the closing segment of the show, I want to be able to put together a couple of tough questions that came to mind as I was researching through our chats, and can be a quick fire. So the first one I had was, you mentioned about Tech in Asia's mission, right? Neutrality, making sure that reporting is unbiased and everything. How do you do that when the relationship is it's still a profit-driven corporation? It's backed by a government-backed entity, but it's an advertising model. Like as I was trying to piece these three things together, it all feels like it's at conflict. Like how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't really think of it as conflict. But so I think it is, if you structure the company and our products well, and then there's like a lot of disclosures, I generally think it works. So for us, okay, maybe let's take a step back in terms of like what role I think media plays in society. Again, I'm American, so like, I tend to be pro-media. But historically, media has always acted as like a check on both private and public sector, right? Like it's there to inform the citizens. It's there to tell stories that maybe, the actors in charge don't necessarily want told, which is why, I take freedom of speech very seriously. Yeah, whatever. So the good news is obviously we're on the tech and business side. So, and so the people that we tend to piss off tends to be like private corporations through our investigative reporting. But I do think that part of the public funding, especially on the SPH and the government side, is like actually media also serves as like a record of history, right? And so someone needs to be out there documenting it. It can't just be like a bunch of TikToks at the end of the day. Like someone needs to be writing, needs to be the storyteller on record. And so media, I think, is really critical. And that's one thing that we also think is part of our job, which is like, no matter how Southeast Asia's tech and startup scene develops, we want to be there to like be a record of what has happened here, all the ups, all the downs, as time goes on. So that's where the public funding comes in, right? Which is like, definitely from the SPH perspective, cannot fail, right? Like it just cannot. It's so critically important, I think, to the Singaporean story, that that government funding is more, in my opinion. I've never checked this with anybody at SPH, but in my opinion, it's more of like that backup, which is like, we want you to actually find your own business model, but worst comes to worst, we cannot let you fail. Yep. That's my sense, because it's too critically important. So we don't, as TIA, don't get very much of that, just a few things here and there to experiment with AI, to be honest. That doesn't really touch us because we're not that critical to Singapore. So that's the government side. I don't think it really muddies too many waters. But then on the advertising side, we're just very clear. Like we have an editorial team, and then we run everything that's commercial that has money attached to it through our studios team. And we just say that like, every time we do work with sponsors for events, we work with clients for branded content, but everything's disclosed. And we're just very clear that like, which part of the organization it's being run through, and keep it all very kosher. So
Follow-up question. Has
Yeah.
there been a time you had to reject a deal because it might conflict with this triangular relationship?
have we rejected a deal? No, but people have rejected us. So like we have had clients, and then our newsroom will publish. I mean, there is, I say firewall, but there's like a pretty much a real firewall in between. Like we don't cross collaborate in terms of like
Yep.
what investigative stories are you writing, and here's our sales pipeline and whatever. It's run totally separately. I run the commercial side. Terrence runs our editorial side. So there have been times where we're about to sign a deal, or we just signed a deal, or we have a client or whatever, and then the editorial team will publish an investigative report, and of course they renege. So have we rejected? I mean, I'm sure maybe once or twice, but I think more likely than not, we're comfortable with this dichotomy, right? Like I actually have no problem saying if on our front page or on our homepage you see like, you know, one investigative story followed by a piece of branded content, I'm like, hey, this is fine, because we're disclosing to our audience that like these are two different parts of the business, and this one's clearly paid, so it's going to have a different tone than what our editorial part says. Like I'm cool with that, but clients sometimes aren't, and they will be like, no, you.
That's proof that it's actually neutral.
That's what I say. Yeah. But you know, it's harder to, if you're very offended by our investigative reporting, then it's harder to convince the client of that. But we just take it. And then we have had people who were upset with us, but then eventually came around, you know? And so yesterday was our 14th birthday.
Wow.
Happy birthday, TIA. And I would say, and having been at the company for 6 years, like it's been many chapters of the Tech in Asia story. There have been, you know, companies who hated us for a while, then love, you know, like whatever. And so for us, we take it all in stride, and it's really just like, we're here to do our job and try to be as neutral and objective as possible. And I do think over the course of the 14 years, we've generally proven that we are not out there to just like unearth every bad story and every gossip out there possible, but we take our role like very, we have a level of like professionalism and respect for the community and for the people within it that like, and we try to bring that sort of like objectivity to everything we do.
Okay. Quick fire question number 2.
Sorry, that was a terrible quick fire
No,
response.
that was good. I think there was a lot to unearth there. I'll try and narrow the quick fire question number 2.
Okay,
A lot of people touted Southeast Asia to be, you know, hopefully the Silicon Valley for Asia.
Yeah.
What do you think is one thing that's missing in Southeast Asia that makes us unable to replicate what Silicon Valley has become? One thing.
So far, exits. Without exits, like, I mean, like we've had a few, but without like sustained, repeatable, like a multitude of exits, it's just hard to build the next Silicon Valley. So like Silicon Valley works because you invest in a company, it grows, it does well, you return the capital, the investors are happy, they reinvest the money, but then also the original and early teams and employees are happy, and then they become the next generation of entrepreneurs. Without those exits, without really successful exits, you do not get that flywheel effect. And so there has just been an absolute lack of truly great and like numerous exits. Of course, we've had a few that we're all happy about, and it's a good start. It's just not enough.
Okay, you need to be able to point the success case so that people can be able to impute some kind of multiple. And I guess Tech in Asia plays a critical role in that in that storytelling, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But actually, we can only tell the story so much as it's actually there, right? And so if their exits aren't happening, there's nothing to tell. They're like, no matter what, there's only so much lipstick you can put on a pig, to be honest.
That is true. One last quick fire question. It's more about yourself, Maria. I think in one of your interviews, you mentioned you love working, you love the hustle of it, but when you had a kid, your kid became the center of it.
Yeah.
What is something that you have learned about work and life from your own personal experience, and of course, meeting so many, you know, leaders in different fields, national stage, domestic stage? What is one thing you've learned about work and life?
Certainly that life is more important than work is one. I think for me, at least before I had a kid, it was hard to imagine. I was like, wow, work is so fun. It's so great. It like makes me feel good. You know, when I do well, it makes me feel good. But it was this all-encompassing thing. And then with the kid, you're like, oh, wow, actually, it's not the most important thing, right? And like, no matter how bad how bad the day was, or how bad a meeting was, or if somebody quit on me, or like whatever it is, like actually the kid part is the most important part. So I think just definitely perspective from that side. But also, honestly, I'm just like I'm calmer at work because I have kids. Maybe because I'm really tired. I can't like.
You can't be worse than my kid. This like the kid like shouts at me, poops at me, but like, you're a rational person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's good. Yeah, I think it's actually the main thing is it's an ego check. Kids keep you really, really humble. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't care how awesome you think you are at work, on stage, whatever. Yeah, exactly.
I'm hungry. I need you now.
You come home and then it's like, wipe my butt. And you're like, okay. You know, and it just keeps you humble. And I think that's, like I said, it's one of the key traits that I think are important to being a great founder and entrepreneur. So
I love your story about how you share about that. And it's very real, right? People can, they have a family, but they still have to put on the front to say, no, I work 24/7, but that's just not true, right? You have to set certain priorities, and it's good that people have that perspective. I think it changes the way people perceive you as a very genuine leader as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Maria. This was extremely enjoyable. And also, since you mentioned it's a happy anniversary Tech in Asia.
Yes,
14 years. That's
happy
a
birthday.
Good milestone.
I know we're like a full-fledged adolescent now. We're like a teenager.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. So fun to be on.